Marcus Porcius Cato Salonianus, Praetor circa 115 BCE. Born when his father, Cato the Elder, was already 78 years old, Cato Salonianus was still a toddler when his elder half-brother was elected praetor. Both he and his brother were named Marcus Porcius Cato, with the names of their respective mothers being used to tell them apart. Neither brother would pass on those names, nor would either line employ distinctive or unique praenomens to avoid confusion. When his brother died suddenly, Cato Salonianus found himself living in the deceptively humble house of Cato the Elder alongside his two nephews, both of whom were his seniors. Due to his mother's lesser status, Cato Salonianus was slated to be the fount of a distinctly lesser line of Catos, although his father's estate was sufficiently vast to support consular careers for all of them. His fate as the progenitor of a lesser line of Catos seemed to be a fixed fact, when both of his nephews attained the consulship, whereas Salonianus himself died in office as praetor, something which had become a common fate for men named Cato. By the time of the social war, the worm had turned, as one of Salonianus' sons won the consulship. His other son, Marcus, died younger than the other Catos, who checked out early, but not before he sired the boy who grew up to become Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger, the inheritor of Cato the Elder's mantle as arch-conservative of the Republic. Thus, ironically, it was in his second controversial marriage where the ornery but still horny old Cato the Censor ultimately secured his legacy. Despite the fame of Cato Salonianus' father, it turns out that Cato the Elder was actually a new man. During the Second Punic War, the Roman Senate was hollowed out by devastating losses in battles such as the one at Cannae, and so they had to recruit a lot of new blood. One of the people they turned to was someone from the provincial aristocracy at Tusculum, Marcus Porcius Cato. This young man would go on to be known as Cato the Elder or Cato the Censor, originally cutting his teeth as an outspoken and rather vicious critic of Scipio Africanus. He would go on to become consul, he would win a number of battles, he also would serve as censor famously in 184, and over the course of his career he would become more or less the icon of Roman conservatism. He would claim to represent the embodiment of the old virtues of the Republic that were in danger of being replaced by the looser morals and more lax standards of men like Scipio, with his obsession with Greek culture and all that. Cato not only was a successful politician who became a faction leader, but he was also someone who was a thought leader more broadly. He was an accomplished historian, a moralist, a solid orator by the standards of his day, and also a highly skilled politician in the sense of being able to brand himself and remain relevant for multiple decades. By 156 BCE, Cato had been prominent in Roman politics for nearly half a century, and he was now in his late 70s. Most men would have been content with that, but not Cato the Elder. He was still vigorous even after all these years and all of the trials of his youth fighting Hannibal, and he was still one of the strongest presences in the Senate. Not only that, but it turns out that he still wanted to move forward with his life in other ways as well, as we'll see. Part of Cato's political branding was that he was a humble man who represented Rome's past. He didn't do all the extravagant fancy stuff that his contemporaries did, and he also didn't have the crazy means that they had. Never mind that he lived extravagantly when he went off to the countryside to his private villas, but when he was in the city, he lived in a humble home, he ate turnips and bread, and contented himself with just water. This also meant, however, that his home didn't have the best privacy. It was not very well built, frankly. And so, Cato, after his wife died around 160, had taken a concubine. He did not want to live the celibate life, and he would chase his concubine around the house and play grab-ass. And he did this in front of his son, Cato Licinianus, and his wife Tertia. They were married, and around this time they would have had at least one, if not two, sons. Licinianus complained about his father's behavior and the hypocrisy of it. Cato, famously as censor back in 184, had actually booted someone from the Senate for kissing his wife in public in front of their kid. The horror. And now, here he was running around the house and having this torrid affair with a slave in front of his young grandchildren and his son and daughter-in-law. So rather than simply giving up his concubine or enhancing his home to create more privacy, Cato decided to do something more drastic. Around 156, he decided to remarry, and he drew up a marriage agreement with the daughter of one of his clients, a young woman named Salonia. This marriage also displeased Licinianus, who actually gathered his friends together and confronted his father and asked if he had done something wrong. This led to a smart-ass response from Cato, and this possibly did a lot of damage to their relationship. Licinianus's concern most likely was that the siring of any more children would lead to the division of the estate, which would hurt his own political ambitions going forward. He was now about to enter the prime of his career, and the prospects of his children, who would be Cato's grandchildren. Perhaps the idea originally was that this woman would simply be Cato's pleasure woman, but she got pregnant. And in 154 or thereabouts, a 78-year-old Cato the Elder welcomed a second son into the world, Marcus Porcius Cato Salonianus. Salonianus being, of course, derived from the name of his mother, Salonia. One has to imagine that Salonia's father was thrilled that his grandson would bear the name Cato and one day be a senator. For Licinianus, this was also a worrying development, however. For the first 5 years of his life, Cato Salonianus and his mother lived in the home of Cato the Elder. And Cato the Elder, who was always an active parent, most likely was at least overseeing every aspect of his life during those 5 years. We can't really say with certainty what kind of attention Cato the Elder was able to lavish upon him at this stage in his life. When he had been a younger man in his prime, he had paid very close attention to every detail of Licinianus's upbringing. He had made sure to tuck him in every single night, no matter how busy he was. He had read to him, and he had also been his tutor in almost every subject. But now, he was nearing 80 years old. Then, to make things harder for the aging Cato, his eldest son, Licinianus, died suddenly in 152, right after he had been elected praetor. And that meant that his two sons also now came to live with Cato, if they hadn't been there already. So now he is officially their guardian as well. We do have some reason to think that Cato the Elder did supervise some of the training of Marcus, the grandson Marcus. All these guys are named Marcus almost, so it gets a little confusing, who became consul in 118, because Marcus famously became a great orator and would attribute some of that to his grandfather. Perhaps Gaius, the younger of the two grandsons, and then Salonianus were a little bit too young to have clear memories of Cato the Elder. Marcus may have been the only one who was really old enough to benefit from that direct contact. Cato the Elder himself finally passed away in 149 after he famously succeeded in getting the Senate to go to war with Carthage for the third time. After that, Salonia most likely remained in the family home and raised him on her own. We don't know where the nephews would have grown up at that point, but presumably because Salonia and also the wife of Licinianus, who would be Tertia, had been together for a little bit, maybe they kept the kids close together, and perhaps Salonianus enjoyed a relatively close relationship with his nephews since they all had a similar upbringing and had spent quite a bit of time under the same roof. Of course, we can't really say with certainty if that was the case or not. However close they may have been as kids, one imagines that Salonianus and his nephews may have developed a little bit of tension as they got older and learned about the realities of Roman politics. To put it bluntly, because Licinianus was the son of a woman who was a proper noblewoman, Licenia, her children and grandchildren were therefore more prestigious than Salonianus, who himself was the son of Salonia, a woman of minor consequence. So, as they grew up, there was this increasing awareness that Salonianus' fate was to be the head of a distinctly lesser branch of the Catos, a cadet branch of sorts. That being said, if you are the cadet branch of someone as famous as Cato the Elder, that's still more than enough to make you consul. And Salonianus was having a pretty good career for himself. He actually attained the rank of Praetor in the year 115, and unlike his elder brother Licinianus, he lived long enough to assume office. Unfortunately, he didn't outdo his brother by much, because he actually died during his term of office, which probably occurred in 115 BCE. So we're pretty sure that his dates of life are 154 to 115. By this time, he had already seen one of his nephews, Marcus, become consul 3 years earlier in 118, and his other nephew, Gaius, was probably already a candidate for the consulship at the time of his death, and Gaius would win for the following year, 114. And so, assuming that Salonianus accepted the cultural logic of the time, that his was to be the lesser branch, he most likely died aware that that prophecy had already come to pass, and that his own children would most likely also suffer from his failure to live long enough to become consul. However, fate was far kinder to Salonianus and his heirs than the Romans would have expected at the time. During the decade of the 110s, Cato Licinianus' sons attained the consulship. However, by the time that his grandsons came of office-holding age in the 90s, the family's fortunes fell off, and they were unable to replicate that success. I believe at least one of them died early. As I mentioned, there was a certain curse in the family of men dying just before they turned 40. And so, the line of Cato Salonianus would become the stronger of the two lines after the year 100. The eldest son of Cato Salonianus, Marcus Porcius Cato, will actually die while he is seeking the office of Praetor. So once again, we have someone dying in his late 30s and dying in association with the office of Praetor. But not before he had married Livia and fathered, among other children, Marcus Porcius Cato the Younger, the man who would become Praetor in 54 and become one of the most iconic figures in Roman history. As for the younger son of Cato Licinianus, he actually would technically achieve more, because he would become consul in 89, but then die in the course of the Social War. And because a consul is usually only about 3 years older than a praetor, this means that he too was subject to the family curse, although in his case, I'm pretty sure he died in battle, so I'm not sure if we want to count that. But suffice it to say that the reason why a whole lot of the Catos don't become as famous as Cato the Elder or his great-grandson Cato the Younger is because most of them don't live long enough to get there. So that is something that we should all take away from this. For the most part, the Cato line is not a line of men who live very long. The only reason we know who Cato Salonianus is because he was the son of one of the most famous Romans of the Middle Republic and the grandfather of one of the most famous Romans of the Late Republic. Together, Cato the Elder and Cato the Younger represented the sort of highlights of Roman conservatism in the Middle and Late Republic. Salonianus, in theory, could have become great. Had he lived longer, he most likely would have become consul just based on the strength of his name and the weight of his estate. But that was not to be. Like many members of his family, including his elder brother, he simply could not make it out of his 30s. For him, as for so many other men named Cato, the office of Praetor was not so much the end of his career as the end of his biological life. Although the circumstances of his origins were controversial and embarrassing, with Plutarch citing the very existence of Salonianus and the marriage to Salonia as proof of Cato the Elder's moral hypocrisy. Without this marriage and without the birth of Salonianus, there would have been no Cato the Younger. And so, ironically enough, had Cato the Elder not broken his own moral precepts and married late in life and irresponsibly had a child in his late 70s, he would not have had a great-grandson who would have been able to revive that kind of hardcore conservatism right as the Republic was going out the window. And in many ways, it's because of the fame of Cato the Younger that the fame of Cato the Elder was kept fresh and revitalized. If we look at the line of Licinianus, it was still around in the late Republic. But not only were they not competing for the highest offices, one of the best-known members of the Licinian branch during the 50s BCE, Gaius Cato, did the unthinkable and backed Julius Caesar. So, without the line of Salonianus, there would have been no revitalization of the Catonian conservative brand, so painstakingly set forth by Cato the Elder, and so slavishly copied by Cato the Younger. I'm Thersites the Historian. Like, comment, subscribe, and don't be like Cato Salonianus and die before your time.